Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to another episode of What's Up with Power. My name is Justin Wagner with Team ODZ. We have another great episode for you today. We've got guest presenter Nate Dunn waiting to give us his tips. I won't spoil the topic because I think it's an awesome one. I want to give him the opportunity to give it its spiel. I want to give a quick word that we have recently launched a podcast with all of our informational rides flowing into the podcast, so that if you're not able to make the live stream next time, you can just simply grab it in the podcast, listen to it on your way to work. So we've got In the Feed Zone, we've got Chat and Chill, we've got What's Up with Power going into that podcast, as well as a roundup from the coaches in the endurance lab they call Coach's Corner is going in there as well. So check that out. You can search the Endurance Lab in any of your podcast apps across the platforms, or also you can go to podcast.teamodz.com to link to it directly, and that link actually goes to the iTunes version. So happy to have Nate on here today. Go ahead and bring him on the screen. Hey, Nate.
Good morning, Justin.
So I did you the disservice of putting the title on the screen as your face came onto the screen. So I kind of spoiled your intro, but the intro I just built up about you giving the awesome spiel about your topic. Go.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me on again, and glad to be here. So today we're going to be talking about kind of some of the very basic steps of what to do if you bought a power meter. So if you've been riding on Zwift for a while, most likely you're familiar with power at some level. You understand that it kind of enables you to interact with the platform in a way that you can get great workouts and all that kind of stuff. So we want to take it from that most basic step and then expand it a little bit to see what some options might be, and to also kind of think about a different process or a different perspective on how to think about how to approach kind of what the power meter gives you or what it enables you to do in the sport. So we'll jump to the next slide. So we're going to focus on these three different main areas, and that is on the bike, post-ride, or larger or long-term planning and analytics. So these are kind of the three different, I'd say, primary areas that a power meter enables you to engage with in cycling. And so we want to jump into each of those with a little bit more specificity. And if during this, if you have any questions about any of these topics, or really when we're finished, anything else, related to training or your power meter, please jot those questions down and let me know, and we'd love to cover them at the end. So next slide, please. So to start this, I want to start with this concept of, the addition, I would say, to a power meter to a bike has really began to, I would say, what's possible with that data has really changed and expanded greatly over the last 10, 15 years. And with that, I think has increased the skill of kind of simplifying your riding, simplifying your training. And this kind of, I think, also mirrors that of smartphone adaptation in our lives, to where, and this is kind of a discipline that I've been going on myself, and that when I interact with my smartphone, and my wife and I, we have two small kids, and I've been really working hard over the past couple months to kind of trying to develop a different relationship to my phone, as opposed to one in which I'm always controlled and driven by the notifications and different buzzing sounds and stuff on the phone. So this picture here is kind of highlighting what you don't want to do when it comes to utilizing your power meter. Or, by further extension, we could do another presentation on this entirely, but, kind of engaging with technology, engaging with your smartphone. So for me, I've worked really hard, just over the past couple of weeks to figure out how can I use my phone in a way to where it's a tool for me. I can communicate with my wife if need be. I can, get back to athletes in a prompt manner, but it's not driving every decision that I'm doing. It's not, forcing me to check it when I'm out with my kids and when I'm wanting to engage in different kind of quality areas of my life. So that's going to be kind of the overarching philosophy of how we're going to look at using your power meter going forward. So we want to teach this skill of simplifying in life, and also simplifying using your power meter, so you can get the most out of it, while not being kind of driven to insanity by having this extra piece of technology that's constantly distracting you with different numbers and metrics and all that kind of stuff. So Next slide, please. So like we said, we really want to, when it comes to on the bike, when it comes to utilizing your power meter on the bike, our number one thing is we don't want our ride experience to be controlled by the device. Now, and by device, I mean by your head unit. So there are certainly times when you might be staring at your head unit and when that feedback that you're getting from your power meter might be driving your effort, but we want to minimize those. We want to keep those, to a minimum. So when we do need the power meter in that context, we're able to utilize it fully. The rest of the time, we really want to develop a structure to where we can control the feedback that we're getting. And there's no need to have feedback, and not just from your power meter, but from every other channel that your bike might be giving you. So that might be cadence, speed, heart rate, temperature, elevation, all this kind of stuff, right? There's no need to be inundated by all of that feedback all the time on the bike. There might be some people that are unique in that they love all that different feedback all coming at the same time, and that doesn't distract them. They're still, able to do really high quality training efforts and enjoy their experience and whatever. But we're going to assume that for most people, that's not really the preferred way that we want to go about doing that. And there's no one teaches that skill of doing that, because we've added these different technologies on the bike. And for some people, especially if you've just purchased a power meter, you don't really know what's valuable and what's not. And so you might display, 12 different metrics on your head unit on the bike and just kind of be feeling overwhelmed by all of them. So what we want to do is we want to create a variety of screens on your device to match your different ride objectives. So this is a strategy that's worked really well for me personally and worked, I think, really well for athletes that I work with. And to say, each ride might have a slightly different objective, or you might be rotating different objectives, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 different objectives that you have when you go out to ride. And we want to have a different screen so we can have that option to kind of change what it feels like to get on the bike and utilize that. So if we could jump to the next slide, please. So we're going to keep this really simple, just to 3 different ones. And let's just say you have 3 different primary objectives, and that is just ride your bike. So that might be you just kind of want to know what time it is and how long you've been riding. Maybe you have some unstructured targets for a ride where you have, maybe some specific work objectives that you want for that ride. Maybe that's TSS or kilojoules, but you can kind of get that work done in any manner of ways. Or let's say you have a really structured interval workout. So across these 3 different objectives, we can look and see how you might utilize your power meter on the bike. So next slide, please. So here's a possible screen. This is a sample screen from a Garmin 520. So really popular one. If you have any other number of devices, you can customize each screen that you have. So this is a screen that I probably use most frequently, and that is that my objectives for this type of ride are I just want to enjoy being on the bike. Usually I have a duration target or maybe a duration demand where I only have 2 hours to ride or 3 hours to ride, and inside that ride time, maybe I don't really have any intensity guidelines. So I might prescribe this for somebody. I might prescribe this kind of ride for somebody who's just getting back into the sport, or maybe it's kind of the off season, and I want them to ride for a specific amount of time, but I don't want them to be burdened by all these constant objectives of I should be doing this, I should be doing that. So this is a screen that's great for that. You can, select this screen on your Garmin and go down this ride and kind of simplify and enjoy other things about riding the bike. All that data that you're accumulating, it's still going into your Garmin. You're still going to be able to utilize that if you want to utilize it later, but you're not being distracted by it, and you're able to engage fully in what that objective is, and that's to simply enjoy riding your bike. So next slide, please. So this is another one, an unstructured ride target. I got these mixed up just a little bit when I was talking about it just a minute ago. But so for this one, let's say you have a specific work objective. So I utilize these types of rides a lot with athletes where they give me an amount of time they have to ride. And then I say, okay, you have this much time to ride. This is about the intensity that it's going to take for you to accumulate this much TSS or this many kilojoules. And if these are kind of new terms to you and you're not familiar with them, I wouldn't worry about them. I'd stick more towards the fact that if you have some unstructured ride targets, this is a screen that can be effective, where really all I want to know is what time of day it is, how long I've been riding, and then I want to know kind of that basic cumulative metric of work. And in this screen here, we're showing TSS, but like I said, that could also be kilojoules, or it could be something else that you've selected. So it kind of gives you, an unstructured target to work with that you can check in on throughout the duration of your ride, but you don't have that hovering effect where you're constantly looking at power and you're looking at that real-time feedback of what your power meter is giving you, but it's still able to keep you on track in a focused and productive way. So we'll go to the next slide, please. So here's kind of our last example here of creating a different screen for a different piece of it, a different type of a ride. So this is an interval workout. Now, a lot of people on their interval workout screens, they show everything. They're showing their heart rate, speed, blah, blah, blah. And for me, I like to just keep it really, really simple. None of those elements contribute to the quality of my workout. I want the bare essentials. So I'm going to show my instantaneous power. I'm going to show my lap power, and I'm going to show my current lap. So if I'm doing 4x4 intervals at whatever intensity, I'm getting those bare essentials to fully commit to a quality effort, to a quality workout, and I'm not being distracted by anything else. So, usually this type of screen is going to be driven by wattage targets. And this is kind of one of those rare examples where the feedback that you're getting from your power meter is driving your effort. And for that reason, we want to save this type of screen just for business time, right? So just when you're trying to work really, really hard and get the most out of an effort. And this is kind of your ace in the hole. We don't need to look at all this feedback for the rest of the time. We want to save this for a specific application when we're really, really driving and really trying to work hard. So this on-bike experience, again, if you're new, you've just purchased a power meter, this is where I would start to say, what are the different types of rides that I'm doing? If I'm not even training right now, then I don't even need to worry about a screen like this. I can just stick to the basics where I just am seeing what time of day it is. And you don't need to feel guilty about the fact that you have this great tool of a power meter, and that just because you have it, you have to show everything it can do all at once on the screen. If you want to get there later, then you can kind of learn about those things, and we'll progress in that. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But if you're only engaged in, let's say, if you only need it to show the time of day and kind of how far you've ridden or whatever, stick to that and don't worry about all the rest of that stuff. Be fully present in what it is that you're wanting to do on that specific ride, and creating different screens can kind of help you do that. So next slide, please. So like we mentioned, for some people, it might be that you purchased a power meter to be able to utilize Zwift and maybe to be able to do more effective workouts. So maybe you've become familiar with how a power meter can help give you a specific prescription of exercise intensity to do. And that's okay. You can stop right there. And before we get to post-ride analysis and planning and analytics, you don't even need to go there. And again, you don't need to feel guilty about, oh, this is this whole world of training with power and I need to get into that. No, you're better off just saying, hey, this is really fun for me and I enjoy this. And then maybe later when you've been involved in the sport a little bit more and you're kind of looking over the edge and saying, hey, that stuff looks interesting, then you can jump into that and you can look at that more fully. But it's okay to just utilize your power meter on the bike. It's worth it to buy a power meter if this is where you stopped, if it was just utilizing it in this fashion. So next slide, please. So like we said, maybe on the bike is enough. If not, if you're interested in a little bit more post-ride analysis, then we can continue to jump in. So first of all, post-ride analysis, it should be fun. If you feel that it's boring and tedious, skip it. No need to do it. So if you've looked at some of the stuff and you're like, man, I see all these squiggly lines and it's really not interesting to me, that's okay. You can stick with just the on the bike stuff and stick there. So the good thing I would say, if you are interested in kind of post-ride analysis, is most free software out there does a really good job of post-ride analysis, and it can tell you things like how much did you climb for that ride, what was the total distance, duration, what was your power output over a specific climb. So any of those kind of classic metrics that most people are familiar with, you can get through post-ride analysis, and they're pretty easily accessible. They're easy to understand. We can look at those things and they make sense to us, and they're also easy to access through free software. So next slide, please. So there's lots of free options. Garmin Connect is a great one for most people that are utilizing a Garmin device. This is the easiest way to kind of push your rides through to different training products. So most of us are familiar with Garmin Connect at some level, and it's free, and they offer great post-ride analysis tools. For a lot of people, they prefer the way that this displays things. So if you just purchased a power meter, try out Garmin Connect. Look at the different ways that you can look at your ride and kind of jump in and start to understand how that displays your ride. Another great one that most of you are familiar with is Strava. Strava has a bunch of great free post-ride analysis tools. Training Peaks has a free account where you can do basic post-ride analysis. If you're looking for more in-depth options, right, there's Training Peaks Premium, WKO4, Strava Premium, Today's Plan, Exert. There's a lot of different products out there that offer about a $10 a month, fee for their plans, and or for their service that gives you kind of a more in-depth look. So I'd start with the free and see if that meets your needs. And if you continue to be interested in what's available and you want to continue to check it out, then you can check out some of the paid options. So next slide, please. So just like before, if you get there, you've done the on-bike stuff, you've looked at some of the post-ride software options, and as you begin to look over into our next topic of planning and analytics, you're like, that doesn't really interest me that much. That's okay. Even if you're just using your power meter for on the bike and for post-ride stuff, and maybe you don't have time to kind of look at some of those other stuff, that's okay. Enjoy it for what it is. It's still worth it. It was still a worthwhile purchase to kind of get get more out of your bike in that context. So next slide, please. So as we look here as we start to look at the long range planning analysis, a quick caveat, and that is that the quality of your power meter really matters most as we begin to make comparisons year after year, or looking out for long range planning and analysis. And if you have a left-sided power meter, left-sided power meters are cheaper for a reason. And as of now, even though there's a lot of competition kind of in the power meter space and it's driven down prices a lot, you still cannot get high. I've never seen a device that's cheap, or that's one of the cheapest or most inexpensive devices, that still gives you quality data that's comparable to the better devices. So it's important to note that if you do kind of jump into this other perspective of long range planning and looking at more in-depth analysis, there are limitations to cheaper power meters, and they make this pursuit, I would say, much less fruitful. Okay, so if you do use a left side power meter, or if you've had inaccuracies with your smart trainer where it hasn't been properly calibrated or all that kind of stuff, it can be difficult to really put much stock into long range or multi-year analysis. So for me, that would be I would make the case that if you haven't purchased a power meter yet, it is worth spending a couple $100 more on a power meter that you can rely and you can trust on, and that you can trust that within 3 and 4 years you'll be able to look back over that data and draw valuable insights from it, even in compared to your recent data. It's worth spending a couple $100 extra on a high quality device if the long range planning analysis is something that you think might be interesting to you. So next slide, please. So before you jump into kind of this long range planning analysis, you really kind of have, it's important, I think, to note that, we have the on the bike, utilizing the power meter on the bike, post ride, and then planning and analysis is this whole other beast. That's a much different project to tackle in terms of time, investment. And if you're not that interested in it, or if you're not that type of a self-learner in terms of really needing to jump in, it's not a worthwhile pursuit. So I oftentimes have, one of the questions I ask new athletes is basically, is this something that you're interested in? Because if you're interested in it, we can engage with it, we can talk about it, and I love teaching about all these different tools. And if not, then that's okay too. We won't waste our time. You can leave that up to me, and I'll try and give you the essentials, to kind of simplify our communication, to say, I want to give you the product that most helps you stay motivated on the bike. And if that doesn't involve long-term planning, analysis, and the talk of all the different pieces that kind of comprise that, then we don't need to talk about it, because it really is big and expansive, and it's not going to be for everybody. Next slide, please. And the reason why it's such a big project is that it kind of incorporates this murky world of science and the art of coaching and periodization, overtraining, the taper, individual strengths, limitations, interval design, all these different types of things. So that's why it's such a big thing. When we talk about just on the bike, utilizing your power on the bike, it's really just kind of, this is your power, and it's displaying it in your device, right? Same thing, kind of post-ride analysis, where it's just kind of, these are the different data channels of your ride, and this is what happened. But when we get into that planning and analysis, there's much larger things that are happening there. And really, I think you have two options, and that is, if you're a self-taught type of person where you enjoy that process, then you dig into all these different topics, and that becomes kind of a side project for you. So it really needs to be either you're going to learn it yourself or you're going to hire a coach to help you do it. So if you're not at a place where you want to hire a coach, or you don't really feel like you have the time or energy to learn about it yourself, then I would say just leave it. Because it's something that unless you really invest in, either in a coach or yourself, it's hard to get much value or insight out of it. So next slide, please. So if you are really interested in it, a couple of basic resources to kind of jump in. And the most basic one is training and racing with a power meter. We've talked about that a lot on this show, and it really is the Bible of power-based training. It was published in 2010. The second edition was published in 2010. It is still the standard foundational knowledge for training with power. Nearly every single training app that has been born since this book has come out has utilized or blatantly ripped off ideas from this from this book. So if you are really interested in learning more about training with power, no matter what training platform you're interested in, this book is still kind of the standard. So there some of the ideas have been advanced quite a bit, and there's still a lot there's some new knowledge out there that's not contained in the book, but it's still kind of required reading if you want to jump in this space. So the next one is, to use Google, right? Oftentimes I'll see people ask questions, and I think to myself, why don't you just type it into Google? What is TSS, right? So Google is a great resource to where, a lot of these concepts or these more advanced training concepts have been around long enough to where you can find a wealth of information all across the internet for free to help kind of in your search of trying to understand. Also, there's various Facebook groups for different software communities. So be it Training Peaks, be it the Sufferfest, be it in any other different types of all of them have specific Facebook groups where you can learn more about that training platform. So maybe Training Peaks, maybe you tried it out and it's not really your thing. Maybe you have another software that you're really interested in and that engages you in a different way. Join their Facebook group, and that might be a great opportunity to learn more about some of these concepts as well. So next slide, please. So quick summary again of these three different perspectives that we looked at. And the first one is that when it comes to utilizing your power meter on the bike, to change your perspective a bit, and instead of being kind of inundated by every single possibility that your power meter gives you, is to really simplify and to focus data screens on your head unit to help support what it is that you want to accomplish in that ride. The second one was start with free post-ride analysis tools. There's a ton of great free options out there to help you dig in, to help you understand your ride a little bit more. And the last one, like we just covered, is long-range planning and analysis, and that whole pursuit is really emerging in the world of not just cycling but endurance sport. And there really is no quick, easy, accessible, here are all the answers solution when it comes to that. So unless you have a substantial amount of time to kind of jump into that, or unless you have the desire to hire a coach to kind of help you in that pursuit, my advice would be to skip it and kind of focus on the other areas of cycling and your power meter, like we talked about before, that don't come with that big investment. So we're going to jump now to a Q&A session. If you have any questions about kind of what we talked about here, if you just purchased a power meter and you have some questions about how to best utilize it that we didn't cover, feel free to fire away. Or if there are any other topics that you want to jump into, let me know.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Nate. Appreciate that. And really think it's interesting to get everyone's different perspective on how we talked about beginning about the different ride screens and the information you want to focus on. I totally fall into the camp of all the fields all the time, and I'm sure you called that one. I'm sure you could see that. I see the smirk on your face.
Yeah.
But
I would just say to that end, I was thinking about this in the same context of a smartphone, where for me, I want to be able to choose what I want to be able to focus on. So if it's email or if it's responding to messages, text messages or whatever, And you can read a lot about this, in kind of the personal efficiency space and all that kind of stuff in terms of, business and all that, is that, you're much more effective at focusing on one thing, one thing at a time. And if you can control your smartphone like that to say, at these times of the day, I'm going to be checking and responding to email rather than constantly being distracted by that. For me personally, that same principle applies to the bike, where if I can save that most crucial feedback for the rides, that demand that feedback, for me personally, I feel like I can get a higher quality effort, and I'm not falsely alarmed by all this immediate feedback that I'm seeing in the same way that I do with my smartphone. But you're different. You're a different bird, right? So you might like just all the data streaming down from the sky at all times, and that helps you engage in your effort, and that's totally okay too. So
Well, the excuse I've come up with in my mind is, like, when I move if I have different screens that put the same data in different places, I might have to hunt around when I look down at the screen.
Yeah.
So I'm sure, like, I could get into a rhythm for different styles, but like in a race, like I want to know exactly where certain things are, like how far we are in the race and stuff. But
yeah, for sure. Well, and I didn't cover this a race screen, but I have a race screen too. And in a race, all I want to know is basically all I want to know is how long the race is. Like how long I've been racing, because that's really the only thing that matters, right? Is that in a criterion 45 minutes, I want to know if I've been racing for 20 minutes, how much time is left in the race. For me, nothing else matters. That's the only critical information. It doesn't matter what my power is. It doesn't matter, right? It's just like, if you are experienced in racing and you're experienced in race tactics, all that matters is that we're at the 20-minute point in the race, for me personally. But other people like to show their heart rate and like to show,
unless maybe you get off into a long solo breakaway and you need to pace yourself, maybe. Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of those.
Question here on the feed. Are there any product reviews for popular power meters out there? DC Rainmaker.
Sure, yeah. So Justin and I, we talked about this, and one of the reasons why I don't talk about popular power meters is because I try to not do anything that other people do a whole lot better than I could ever do. And product reviews for power meters is one of those spaces where if you go to DC Rainmaker or just Google power meter DC Rainmaker review, and it's the most comprehensive look at every power meter out there that you could ever find. So that's one of the reasons why I don't talk about it. I could give you my personal perspective on what I think are the best units, but if you want the most comprehensive look, that's where you should start. That's the Bible of power meter review comparison.
If you go to his in-depth review on the power meter you want, and there's something missing there, send me a note. Because honestly, even people who are specifically interested in purchasing that model, there's more information there than most of them need to or want to know. I mean, and he's not paid off by the power meter companies, completely self-supported. So he's not just saying, oh, this brand is good because they pay me. Nope. Companies will send him power meters, but he'll send them back after he reviews them, and he'll buy them at market value on his own to maintain his independence. So,
yeah, it's good. It's good stuff. So if you have questions about power meters, you can send me a text. I have strong opinions about power meters. I have experience with a lot of different athletes using a lot of different power meters. So my perspective on what I like, I have a specific perspective. So if you have questions about that, you can feel free to follow up with me. But for to see what's out there, his is the best.
Yeah.
The best guy.
Well, and even Nate's views differ from mine. I use left-sided power meters.
Yeah.
And there's I guess I want to defend myself here if I can. I mean,
you were attacked.
Yeah, I was attacked, and I got to defend myself now. I mean, so what are the trade-offs here? Let's maybe be more specific about it. So I don't want people to think that just left-sided power meters are random number generators. They're not. I mean, you can definitely get a left-sided power meter that will accurately and precisely and repeatedly give you accurate numbers. The trade-off there is it's only measuring your left side of your body. So like when I lean over to my left side here or my right side, I can affect those power numbers. And so if and as you put out more or less wattage in your zones, your balance between your left and your right side of your body may not be consistent. It may vary. So there's a few variables in there. But that being said, it'll always be consistent with itself. So if you're training with that power meter, comparing yourself to it, it will be consistent with itself, and you can absolutely get, I think, valuable results out of a left-sided power meter. Nate obviously had a stronger opinion in the opposite direction of that, but
well, I would say my opinion is more about, so let's say, you're training with a left-sided power meter, and let's say 4 years down the road you switch to a crank-based power meter or some other technology, and like we talked about, if you're doing long-term analysis, and let's say I'm looking at 4 years of your data, and I'm looking back at those years in which you had a left-sided power meter, which could be plus or minus 4 or 5% based off your pedal balance. That's where I think there's the biggest limitation. So where if you're utilizing a left-sided power meter and that's the only power meter that you've used, then like you said, those are accurate comparisons to itself. But once you begin to, and I've worked with athletes that have had left-sided power meters and then had, maybe crank-based power meters, and we basically have to look at that data and say, well, did you get, what can we infer from that? Because ultimately, if your pedal balance is, 48-52, and you're doubling that side, whatever the number is, we can't really draw the comparisons we can draw from data from a crank-based power meter are not the same as if that data was coming from the same source. So that might not matter to you at all, right? So if we're talking about on the bike, or if we're talking about post-ride analysis, or if you're like, hey, I'm not really concerned about a couple years out there and comparing multiple seasons of data, that might not be a concern to you, and a more affordable power meter option that gets you in the game might be a great option. So that's kind of the span, I guess, of what's out there.
Yeah, and I think the other point is, a lot of times people see left-sided power meters because they're less expensive, right? And so if you're just trying to go for the absolute least expensive product on the market, lower costs mean less validation, less engineering, all these things. So, I mean, it could be that they come out with a design that does cost less money to produce, but just be concerned that, like $100 power meter, I would be very weary of.
Sure.
Power meter that claims it can measure your power from your valve stem, I would be weary of. Power meter that claims that it can measure your power just by being attached to your handlebars, I'd be weary of. These kind of things.
Yeah, for sure. And there's a lot of those options out there as power meters have become more popular. So, but the basic rule to me is that you can't. There are no $100 power meter options out there. The brands that have been around for a long time have been out there for the quality of their the length of their being around is reflective in the quality of their data, and that's been my experience. So
yeah, it's a much more complex thing to measure than just say measure your heart rate. The devices are inherently more complex, and it's easy to get wrong. There's many cases of new power meters that are coming out on the market, and there's so many edge cases, and we didn't expect bumping a rock to throw off the internals and go haywire, and so now we have to rewrite our algorithm and all these things that you just wouldn't think of that can actually affect it.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, we're out of time. It's been a great episode. Appreciate all your thoughts, Nate. If you guys are just joining late, didn't catch the whole episode, there'll be a replay available, YouTube, here on the channel, as well as podcast should come out within the next day or so. You can listen to that on the go. So if you want to check out the podcast, search the Endurance Lab on your various podcast channels. And we've got this show, we've got Chat and Chill, we've got In the Feed Zone, as well as Coach's Corner, the roundup from the coaches in the Endurance Lab. So anyway, hope you've enjoyed the show. Hope you've enjoyed Nate. Check him out on his website for more great content, datadrivenathlete.com. Appreciate your time, Nate, and we will see you next time.